dust settled slowly across the main street of Cedar Falls, each grain catching the amber light of late afternoon. Samuel Thompson stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered hands gripping his hat so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the town square, sharp and businesslike, cutting through the heavy silence that had fallen over the gathered townspeople. "Next lot," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying an uncomfortable weight. "The Morrison family, 6 in total, mother, 5 children, debts must be settled." Samuel's chest tightened as he watched the family step forward onto the auction block. The woman, Margaret Morrison, held her head high despite the circumstances, her arm wrapped protectively around the smallest child. The other children clustered close to their mother like frightened birds seeking shelter from a storm. The oldest girl, perhaps 14, kept her eyes fixed on the ground, while the boys shifted nervously, their small faces pale with confusion and fear. This was the harsh reality of the frontier in 1875, when debts couldn't be paid, and there was no other way to settle accounts. Families could find themselves at the mercy of creditors and the cold machinery of the law. Samuel had seen it before, but it never got easier to witness. The crowd murmured uneasily. Most folks in Cedar Falls knew the Morrison family. Margaret's husband had died in a mining accident 6 months earlier, leaving behind crushing debts from failed investments and medical bills. With no relatives to turn to and no way to pay what was owed, the family faced an uncertain future. Samuel understood their situation all too well. 2 years ago, his own wife Emma had passed away from fever, leaving him alone on his struggling cattle ranch with nothing but memories and an empty house that echoed with loneliness. He'd thrown himself into his work, trying to build something meaningful from the ashes of his grief, but the isolation had nearly broken him. "Do I hear an opening bid?" the auctioneer called out. Several men in expensive suits stepped forward. Samuel recognized them as representatives from the larger ranches and mining operations. They were looking for cheap labor, people who would work for room and board until their debts were considered paid. The family would likely be split up, sent to different locations, and treated little better than indentured servants. Samuel watched as Margaret Morrison's composure began to crack. She whispered something to her eldest daughter, who nodded and drew the younger children even closer. The woman's eyes swept the crowd, searching for any sign of mercy or compassion among the sea of faces. $50, called out a man in a black suit. $75, came another voice. Samuel's hands trembled slightly as the bidding continued. He thought of his empty ranch house, of the meals he ate alone in silence, of the way his footsteps echoed in rooms that had once been filled with Emma's laughter. He thought of the children's faces, pale with fear and uncertainty. $100, he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the square. The crowd turned to look at him. Samuel Thompson was known as a fair man, honest and hard-working, but he kept to himself mostly. Few people knew him well enough to guess his intentions. $125, counted the man in the black suit. Samuel took a deep breath. He thought of Emma, of how she'd always wanted children, of the nursery they'd prepared but never used. He thought of the warmth that had once filled their home and the cold emptiness that had replaced it. $500, Samuel said firmly. Gasp rippled through the crowd. $500 was more money than most people in Cedar Falls saw in 2 years. It was enough to pay off the Morrison family's debts entirely, with money left over. The auctioneer's gavel came down with finality. Sold to Samuel Thompson. As the crowd began to disperse, Samuel approached the Morrison family slowly, his hat still clutched in his hands. Margaret Morrison looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. She'd heard of Samuel Thompson, knew him to be a decent man, but she also knew that her family's fate now rested entirely in his hands. "Mrs. Morrison," Samuel said quietly, his voice gentle. "Ma'am, I want you to understand something right from the start. I didn't buy your family. I paid your debts." Margaret's eyes widened in confusion. I don't understand, Mr. Thompson." Samuel looked at each of the children in turn, then back at their mother. "Your husband's debts are settled. You're free to go wherever you choose, make whatever life you want for yourself and your children." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of wagon wheels on dirt and the soft whisper of wind through the nearby cottonwoods. But Samuel continued, his voice growing even quieter. "If you're willing, I'd like to offer you and your children a home, not as workers, not as servants, but as family. My ranch has plenty of room, and I could use the company." Margaret Morrison stared at him in disbelief. "You would do this for strangers?" Samuel's eyes grew distant for a moment. My wife Emma always said that kindness was the only thing that truly mattered in this world. She believed that we're all just passing through, and the only legacy we leave behind is how we treated one another. The oldest girl looked up for the first time since stepping onto the auction block. You mean we could stay together? That's exactly what I mean, Samuel replied with a gentle smile, if that's what you all want. Over the following months, the Thompson Ranch transformed from a lonely outpost into a warm, bustling home. Margaret proved to be an excellent cook and housekeeper, bringing order and comfort to rooms that had sat empty for too long. The children filled the house with laughter and energy that Samuel had forgotten was possible. The oldest girl, Sarah, helped with the household accounts and proved to have a keen mind for business. The boys, Thomas and little William, took to ranch work like they'd been born to it, while the youngest daughters, Mary and baby Elizabeth, brought a sweetness to daily life that warmed Samuel's heart in ways he hadn't expected. As winter gave way to spring, the makeshift family grew closer. Samuel found himself teaching the boys to ride and rope, while Margaret and the girls planted a garden that would have made Emma proud. Evening meals became celebrations of simple joys, filled with stories and gentle teasing, and the comfortable rhythm of people who belonged together. One evening, as Samuel sat on his porch watching the children play in the yard while Margaret hung laundry that danced in the warm breeze, he realized that in trying to save one family, he had somehow saved himself as well. The empty spaces in his heart had been filled not with the memory of what he'd lost, but with the reality of what he'd found. Sometimes, he thought, the greatest acts of kindness are the ones that heal the giver as much as the receiver. In the distance, the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Samuel Thompson smiled, knowing that Emma would have approved of the family they'd built together in the heart of the American West.